Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to talk about a portable topping G5. It is a portable, but this is not a DAC dongle. It's actually this small brick-sized DAC slash headphone amplifier that's almost as big as your smartphone, but thicker and heavier. And yeah, it is portable, but is not ultra portable as something like this, for example. But with that increased size and weight, we get few extras. For example, there's a hefty battery inside. So this one particularly has a 4000 milliampere hours battery, and you can use it up to 10 hours if you use this one as a DAC and headphone amp, or up to 20-something hours if you use it only as a headphone amp. But here I really have to say this. I don't see any reason or any situation where I would rather use this as a headphone amp with internal DAC of my smartphone. That way I would get more power, more drive, but if I use its digital inputs, its USB input, and use it both as a DAC and headphone amp, sound fidelity definitely is higher and better than when you're just amplifying the analog output of your phone or laptop or PC with the analog part of this topping G5, with its amplification section without using its own DAC. I just think it's shame to have such a good sounding DAC and not use it just to get away with charging it less. So personally, I would use this one only as a combination, as a DAC slash headphone amp. And that way you can get 10 hours of playback out of it, and to fully charge it, you would need around 4 to 5 hours, which is, yeah, not that fast, but it's great for overnight charging, and then the next day you have full 10 hours of playback. I don't think that any of us would listen to the music longer than that. So what do we have here? We have a Sabre DAC chip, I'll put that on the screen. Then we have a fairly powerful headphone amplifier, around 1.2 watts at its max. I'll again put that on the screen. Regarding inputs, we have two USB-C ports. One is meant for data, that's basically your DAC input, your digital input. The other one is meant for charging, so these two are separate ones. And that's good because you can charge it and use it at the same time. Then there's also an analog input, auxiliary input. It's placed in the front, 3.5 millimeters input, if you want to use only amplification part. When it comes to the outputs, there are two of them. One is 3.5 millimeters single-ended, and the other one is 4.4 millimeters, but again single-ended. G5 does not have any balanced circuitry inside. 4.4 in this case is just a different physical connector. So if you're maybe using balanced headphones with headphones with balanced cables and 4.4 millimeters jack, you can connect it directly to this one without using any adapters, but the signal that you're getting is still single-ended. And the last thing here in the front is a volume knob that also doubles as a switch, power on switch. So once you start turning it, it clicks, as you can hear, and there are some lights here, green one, blue ones, etc. And you can read the manual to see what all of this means. I won't bother you with it. But what I wanted to say is that the whole device feels sturdy. It's made out of aluminium and it has like this rock solid feel. And the bottom part looks like leather. I'm not sure if it's a real leather or not, but here it is and it feels really nice. And you get this sticky piece of rubber and silicone on two sides, so you can put this on your desktop, for example, and it won't slip over the desk. And you also get rubber bands inside of the box, so you can basically attach it to your smartphone if you wish to do so. Because just personally, and this is like totally personal opinion, I wouldn't hook this with my smartphone and carry this big, chunky, bulky rubber band connected thing. But hey, to each their own. And if you have any opinion on this, please let me know down below in the comments. Would you carry something like this in your pocket with your smartphone or not? Because now we are moving to the sound part of this review, and how does topping G5 actually sounds. And let me tell you, it sounds like a good topping. Basically, it has pretty neutral tonality. And if you listen to it in isolation, you do not think, oh, this is bassy or this is warm. But there is no excess of high frequency either. You don't think like, oh, this is super bright. But what it is, it's definitely fast sounding and clean, clear, crisp sounding. And that means that the bass line is quite deep and quite punchy, it's energetic. If you listen to some electronic music, like this one for example, notes will sound punchy and kicky. But the bass line will not be warm. It will not sound really full and fuzzy. It's more on a controlled, fast-paced, kung fu side of things. It's not like a heavy boxing champion or something like that. And now think of that speedy, incisive, well-controlled, clean character and just copy-paste it to the mid-range and to the highs. And you'll get the gist of how this topping actually sounds. And that would be about its tonality. When it comes to dynamics, it's actually quite good. And here you see that device like this has advantage compared to a device, small DAC dongle like this one that I'm holding here. And once again, I mention electronic music, for example, those beats will sound faster and more energetic and more beefed up through this than through basically any dongle DAC that I've tested on this channel. Then sound staging is quite decent, the background is dark, and you can easily pinpoint and differentiate where's what's happening around you. But there, the sound stage is not particularly big. G5 is all about clarity and cleanliness, precision and focus, and separating those tones from each other well, but the space that it's arranging those tones in is not that huge and dispersed and big and airy, it's just moderately sized. But I don't want to talk more about the sound of G5 in isolation. I think I covered the most important parts. What I want to do now is to compare it to something that I had at hands with me to compare it directly. And for example, I've started with a really great DAC dongle, Shanling UA5. And if you follow my channel regularly, you probably know that this one is basically my favorite around this price, $200 to $300 US. It costs $235, I believe, which is quite okay, quite comparable to G5, which is $299. And first of all, tonality of UI5 is definitely warmer. This one is on the warmer side of things when it comes to the bass line and the mid bass. But it's also very clear and clean in the mid-range and upper frequencies. G5, on the other hand, is more controlled and more focused in the bass line. There is no warmth to talk about here, really. And you can say maybe it's more neutral even. And regarding tonality, it would come to preference, really. Where the difference really kicks in is in the dynamics and authority part of the sound, because G5 definitely sounds more driven. It has more power and it shows. It's more punchy, it's more alive sounding. So if you're about ultimate clarity and cleanliness, but that's also paired with forceful dynamics and huge power, G5 takes a win. But that said, if you're okay with slightly less dynamic, slightly mellower, softer tone, this smaller and slightly cheaper UA5 still does a great job. And it's being smaller at the same time, more portable really. Then I moved to compare it to Aune BU2 that I could borrow from my friend. And yeah, I just found out the G5 to my ears and in my opinion sounds better in most aspects. First of all, tonality. It's slightly fuller and more neutral, whereas Aune BU2 is sharper and thinner in the mid-range and highs. Both are equally detailed and revealing, but G5 is just a little bit more full-bodied. So I won't be at this comparison any longer because they have same form factor, they have same price, they have similarly detailed sound, but G5 brings fuller tonality, more full-bodied, more wholesome tone, and in this moment I would definitely go for G5 rather than Aune BU2. And then next I wanted to compare it with some typical desktop products. For example, what if you just want a decent, not too big desktop DAC and headphone amp? You don't need the portability part, but you think maybe it is a plus, it doesn't take much space on my table, but how does it compare sonically to those typical desktop products? So for that, I first compared it to SMSL C200. This one is, I think, $200 I believe, and it is a small unit for a desktop product. It will not take much space, definitely, but it is a little bit bigger, of course, than G5 here. Now, without talking much about the differences in their connectivity and options, just about their sonic differences, I found C200 to sound significantly warmer, and it has like that fuller, juicier bass line, and that especially goes for the mid bass that lends a little bit of warmth to the mid range too. And then in the highest spectrum, I feel that C200 is a little bit more airy, like there's a little bit more texture to the sound. And that you can maybe notice more of that small airy stuff happening around the main tone. Whereas G5 is more focused on clean and clear edges. So for example, let's say that you are listening to a guitar solo. That will probably sound more alive, more crisp, and even slightly more dynamic through G5. Like you would probably think like, wow, that sounds just cleaner and crisper, and that's it. Through C200, that would sound a little bit more mellow, like those same guitar plucks from the same song are not as well defined and as clean. But then if you listen to something with vocals or maybe saxophone or any other instruments like cello, for example, that has that textured tone, that richer, wider but more textured tone than a guitar, you would think, wow, that sounds a little bit fuller, it has bigger, fuller body and more texture through C200 than it does through G5. All that said, C200 does sound more mellow in general. It's a little bit more rounded, warmer, and a little bit less dynamic than G5. That's really tidy, well-focused, and clean. It leans on those leading edges of tones, and it does that with slightly greater punch and dynamic. And I would say they're equally talented, but in a slightly different way. So I cannot make a judgment here. I probably slightly prefer SMSL C200 because I like that warmer, full-bodied character. But if you're about cleanliness and clarity, you would probably prefer G5, especially if you also appreciate higher dynamics and more like kick. And then I compared it to slightly more expensive SMSL M500 MK2. The original price of this one is $440, but nowadays you can often find it on some sort of sale, which brings its price much closer to G5 actually. And in this comparison, M500 MK2 actually sounds overall better. It can do dynamics at the same level as G5 here, and it has that fuller, warmer tonality in the same way that C200 had, but it's clean enough, so I don't really feel now in this comparison that G5 sounds cleaner. It just feels that its tones are more simple. And also, the sound stage is bigger and more spacious with M500 MK2. And it feels slightly more congested and narrower with G5. So if you want a desktop product and you can find this one at a decent price, it is better sounding device. But it's probably not a fair comparison because G5 is a smaller, portable, and less expensive device. And it does sound really well on its own. It does sound neutral and clean and dynamic. And if I think about portable devices only, I can think of some that maybe do some things better than G5, but in general, I cannot think of a portable device that does everything better than G5. So because of that, I can only conclude that G5 here is a really good sounding portable DAC/headphone amp. And the only reason for me to not recommend it to you is if you maybe don't like that toppings tonality, that cleanliness and that neat, tidy sound, or you simply don't need a portable DAC. But otherwise, this is one pretty decent sounding product. And if its feature set and its connectivity and everything it brings to the table suits your needs, then it's definitely should be considered. It's basically a bridge between these stationary and these super portable products. Yeah, that would be all for today, guys. Now, if you like this video, then click that button, comment down below, subscribe, become a patron maybe, that really helps the channel, and see you next time. Bye.